Hello and welcome to episode 41 of the Biznews Business Briefing. From the team at biznews.com, I'm Lucy Ferreira. It's Tuesday, the 23rd of August, and today Alec Hogg and I are joined by our colleague Michael Appel. After we've had a look at what the markets were up to today, Michael, Alec and I will be discussing investor skepticism about the recent rally in equity markets, as well as highlights from the Biznews Share Portfolio webinar that Alec hosted earlier today. Michael will also be taking us through some of his insights on the relationship between Arthur Fraser and Cyril Ramaphosa, and we'll be hearing an interesting snippet from Alec's results interview with Sasol CEO Fleetwood Grobler on that Bain story. But Alec, before we get into all of that, what's been happening on the markets today?
Thanks, Lucy. The JSE had a very good session, and this was surprising after the big sell-off on NASDAQ last night. NASDAQ and the S&P 500 index posting their worst night our time, in well over a month. And here in South Africa, though, the rand weakened against the dollar from 1701 to 1709, and against the pound by about 10 cents to 20 Rand and 13 cents, and against the euro by 5 cents. And that lifted the JSE because we have many exporters on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and they win when the Rand loses. The top 40 index was up by just under 1%. Industrials were up very slightly. The resources index was the one that did all the running, 2.7% gain on that side. Financials were up by about 1/5 of 1%. The other big news today was the Brent crude price zoomed back up, almost $100 a barrel as we speak right now, a 7% gain on the day. It was down to $93 yesterday. The reason for this is that the OPEC producers, the cartel, are now going to have a different set of production numbers, and clearly they want to cut those numbers back a little bit, reduce supply. The idea, what was happening there was that the intention was the Russian oil wasn't supposed to get into the market because of sanctions, but it is getting in, it's slipping in. And so OPEC are now redoing their figures, and that the result of that was a very sharp increase in the crude oil price. That won't be sad for the Sasol shareholders. As you mentioned earlier, I did speak to Fleetwood Grobler. Sasol numbers were, as expected, very, very strong. This after the oil price received. Sasol gets, it was a 46 billion Rand bottom line turnaround on its oil and gas side. 46 billion Rand. And that hoisted the share price, or justified the share price, which has gone up 20 times since its low in March 2020. It's astonishing to think. And we actually had it in our portfolio, in the Biznews portfolio back then, and unfortunately sold it out at 150 Rand after a couple of months, which is a very good return from 28, I think we paid, to 150. But today it's sitting at just under 400 Rand a share, and it went up another 1.9% on the results. In fact, I exaggerated a bit. It's sitting at 338 Rand and 29 cents at the close. Other big movers today, MTN was down just about 1%, ABSA up 1%. That's another one in our portfolio. And I went against the trend because First Rand, another big bank, was down by 0.25%. Momentum Metropolitan, that MMI, the old MMI group, that was up by 3.5% today. That on a trading update from the company. Old Mutual was 1% higher, Redefined down 1%, Glencore up almost 3%, helped by the improvement in the resources shares, and then Sibanye was up by 2 2/3%. As far as the stories are concerned on the SENS, in other words, the Stock Exchange News Service, we had full year results coming out from Aveng to the end of June. They were not welcomed. The share price there down by 5%. Merafi brought its interim results out again below market expectations. That was down. The share price there dropped by 10%, and Aspen was down by 1%. This after it had earlier given us a trading statement for its financial results, which were released today. And Momentum Metropolitan, as mentioned earlier, had a trading update. And the consequence of that was, the share price that rose by more than 3%. 8%. So that's on the markets, Lucy. But you've been scouring around with our friends and colleagues and partners at the Financial Times of London and found something real interesting.
Indeed, one of their clips today was on the investor skepticism that we're seeing coming from the summer rally, as they refer to it in the Northern Hemisphere of equities. We've seen a great rally and a bounce in those shares. And the FT had some interesting takes on it, Alec.
U.S. stocks slid lower on Monday. The S&P 500 fell more than 2%. It's the biggest drop in 2 months. Investors are increasingly worried about how much central banks will raise interest rates to battle inflation. But for most of the summer, actually, stocks have been rallying. The question is, what's behind this upswing? The FT's Eric Platt says a lot of people on Wall Street are skeptical.
And that's because over the last few weeks, there hasn't been much to really give you faith that the big drivers of the market, i.e. the economy, inflation, and what the Fed is going to do, has really gotten to a better place, right? And so there's a sense amongst big investors and money managers that maybe the rally that they've seen so far doesn't have the kind of conviction behind it you'd want to see.
Okay, so Eric, if this rally isn't because of investor confidence in the economy, what is causing it?
Yeah, so we've been speaking to traders really at every bank on Wall Street. And the sense we've been getting more and more is that this is really short covering by hedge funds, including a large group of hedge funds that earlier this year were very short the market, i.e. they thought the market would fall further, that started to cover their bets. And because these particular hedge funds are called trend following hedge funds, as they started to cover their bets, the market started to rally. And they then had to follow this new trend of market rallying. So they kept covering their short bets, they kept buying in, and that really helped provide fuel to the market rally.
Eric Platt is the FT's markets editor.
It's interesting. He talks about things like short covering. When my interview today with Fleetwood Grobler, I had to ask him to not simplify things, but just explain what it means to the general public, some of the EBITDAs and ratios that he was talking about. And he did quite a good job. That interview is up on the Biznews radio channel right now. You can listen to it. And if you want to listen to it later on YouTube, if that's your preference, you can get that one too. But short covering, you know what that means, Lucy.
Do I, Alec? And I was just about to say, for the layperson, when you get into all of the financial terminology, are you long? Are you short? Is it a put? Is it a sell? Is it up? Is it down? And I think what makes me most curious is that investors, it seems, all over the world, especially in Western markets, are looking at predictions for the future. What is the Fed doing? What are the markets going to be doing? And how is it going to be affecting and impacting us? And I think my biggest interest is from the South African perspective. So markets go up in the US and it's good for us. But which analysis do we rely on, and who do we look to plan our future investments?
Yeah, it's real confusing. You talk about bulls and bears and stags. Bulls are the people who think markets are going up. Bears are people who think markets are going down. Stags are people who think markets are going to stay the same. And then you can get all kinds of other animals in between, which we won't mention here. But in essence, what the FT is saying is that really bad session that Wall Street had last night was caused by a reassessment after the share prices in the US had really fallen. No, they had their worst half year, the first half of this year, since 1939. So you're really talking about historic stuff. And then thereafter, they bounced back. This was from mid-June, and had a very good run in July and in August. And it was reflected in our portfolio, which went up very strongly in those 2 months. In fact, in the last month, the Biznews portfolio, and we did the webinar today on that, was up by 8%. Now, in 1 month, if you can gain 8%, you're doing something. You're really going somewhere. That was helped by a rand, which was weaker, but in dollars, the portfolio was up by 6%. But now you lost 2% of that last night. So it would have been up in dollars by 8%, but we lost 2% last night. Good news is right now on the US markets, they are, and this is early evening South African time. They seem to have finished their little stress from last night, and they're stable. So S&P is down very, very slightly. The Nasdaq is up very, very slightly. It's almost like the stress is now getting out of the system. Something I didn't tell you about when going through the big markets earlier is that Bitcoin is now $21,500. I know there's a huge group of people in South Africa who own Bitcoin, and many of them through the Geltec crypto basket, which was up 3.7% today at 420 Rand and 11 cents. And finally, the gold price up by 1% at $1,751. But our colleague Michael Appel is with us in studio, in our virtual studio. Mike, good to see you. You've done an explainer on Arthur Fraser. Tell us who Arthur Fraser is, and the explainer that you unpacked really well. You do these things brilliantly. Was connecting him to Cyril Ramaphosa.
Well, thanks, Alec, and hi, Alec and Lucy, and everybody else tuning in. Yes, this is. It took me several days to go through just media reports and go through the state capture inquiries, fifth installment, volume 1, which deals with crime intelligence and the State Security Agency, tying together testimony of former ministers and former spies and people who go by the name of Mr. X and Miss Y and Miss K. And, you know, the mind wonders who these people are in real life, but the testimony that they give is astonishing to piece together just how badly run the State Security Agency was. And when I say badly run, I mean how much money was literally walked out the door. And in this explainer that I've put together, I'm sure it's apparent to a lot of people, but I've been covering politics and so on for many years. But I was a young journalist at the time that Jacob Zuma's rape trial was on. He was acquitted of that. Then it was the corruption charges. Then the spy tapes came out. And the piece I've put together, that's up on Biznews.com. Please go and read it. If reading is not your thing, you just like to listen to it, it is up on Spotify and iTunes. You can listen to the article. Alternatively, you can go and look at my mug on Biznews TV on the YouTube channel, where I try to piece together how intricately connected Arthur Fraser is. One of 6 kids born to parents on the Cape Flats, gets involved in student politics, young age, leaves South Africa at some point, goes into exile, comes back. But when I say this, goes into exile, I don't know where. By virtue of being in the spy world, the intelligence world, there is almost nothing about the man on the internet except for a very brief introduction that is on the Department of Correctional Services website when he was announced as the new Director General. Or the new National Commissioner of Correctional Services. So Arthur Fraser, Jacob Zuma, and then Cyril Ramaphosa, and how this constant shadowy figure always standing in the back that somehow drafted and crafted the narrative and the direction that South Africa would take. If you think that sounds a bit too dramatic, go and listen to the explainer and understand. If it were not for certain things Arthur Fraser had done, we would not have potentially ended up with the presidents that we have currently and had. So just let that sink in for a second, Alec.
Just to relate to this as well, I spoke with Charlie Robertson, who's an economist. He calls himself the time-traveling economist. And what he does is he looks around different parts of the world, and he says that because of 3 factors, this country is where the US was, say, in 1910. And this country is where the UK was in, say, 1870. And that's the reality of it because of different developments. And what we're seeing in South African politics is no different to the craziness that went on in what we now look up to, democracies in other parts of the world. So I suppose for us, we do shake our heads. When I see this, the work you do, sometimes I think, no, come on, Mark, this can't be true. But, the time-traveling economist will say, well, of course it's true, because have a look at what happened in the US in 1890. You would be there, as he said, you bought your attorney and your judge at the same time when you went into a court case.
Yeah, so much of what is contained in the allegations against public figures in this country. Alec, one favorite piece is our Minister of State Security. His wife is a convicted drug lord in this country. Do you remember Siyabonga Cwele and his wife Cheryl? She was recruiting people to send over to Brazil to be drug mules to peddle drugs back into South Africa. The wife of the state security minister. You cannot make it up.
You can't. You really, really can't. It's crazy, isn't it, Lucy? You know, we live in a world where, in the financial world, where we are very first world. We connected to everywhere else. But my goodness, the depths, the place that Mike scrambles around in is, it is. There are many books in that. But Michael, you are going to love the next clip. I had an interview, as mentioned earlier, with Fleetwood Grobler, and you've been doing a heck of a lot of work on Bain. So I warned him beforehand that Bain was going to be covered in a results discussion, and did so again. Have a listen to this. I warned you that I was going to be asking you about Bain. The whole of South Africa is very cross with Bain, and they are still doing business with Sasol. What's the story there?
So we have stopped doing business with them in the first announcement of this, noises and reported irregularities that was surfaced. So we stopped, and there were many other of the consultants' houses that we did the same. And then we had gone through the due diligence after the Nugent Commission came up and all the facts were again assessed. We've done our due diligence, and we're really looking at what have they done to mitigate and to really stop or to remediate all of those findings. And on basis of that, we readmitted them to do business with them from 2019. And so when we look at the facts coming out now from the Zondo Commission, we didn't find any new facts that was not assessed during our due diligence. And so that was why we said, we've done that, we've assessed that, we're happy with the remediation that they've done, and therefore they were, still allowed to do business with us. But this new latest matter where the UK government has indicated that they're not happy with them, we are now again going to look at that facts. And if there's any new facts coming out which changes our outcome of the previous due diligence, of course, we will reconsider that. But until that point in time, I believe we need to treat them in terms of, what are the facts at the moment and what is new that will change our stance towards that outcome.
I wonder if Appel Williams will be happy to or satisfied with that explanation. Are you?
Alec, let's look at the facts here. What did Jacob Rees-Mogg and the UK government, the British government, base their decision of a 3-year ban on? It was on the basis of the findings of the Nugent Commission and the State Capture Inquiry's reports, which implicate Bain and company in the evisceration of SARS and in milking the South African taxpayer of 2 billion rand during Jacob Zuma's presidency. Work in Telkom. And the problem here is Telkom, SARS, and the Development Bank of South Africa, I think the PIC. So there are so many places that Bain had its tentacles in. We don't know because there hasn't been disclosure on that. But for Sasol to say that they believe Bain has said mea culpa, we have remedied what was wrong, and they are happy with that. How is it that a foreign government, based on those very reports that your guest referenced there, have said, wow, no, we are banning them in our country, yet in South Africa, we have companies that continue to do work with them based on the very same findings that the UK government bases its decision on? I think it's astonishing.
Fleetwood Grobler is the chief executive of Sasol, and as mentioned, I did warn them. I don't believe in ambushing people during interviews. Sometimes you get the wrong the wrong result from that. You're not really looking. You're not looking ever as a journalist to ambush somebody. You want them to share their information with the public. So he knew it was coming, but he still didn't sound very convincing to me, Lucy.
Yeah, Alec, I think it's just an indictment, and as you say, he did know it was coming, but we can't deny the role that all private and the players have to kind of steer where the country is going. And I think it's examples like that where we as a public expect to see activity, and that speaks to Michael's astonishment. Are the actions right, and should Bain still be operating here?
Well, I think we know what Appel Williams would say. And Mike, it'll be interesting when you next get a chance to chat with him to give us maybe a little bit more in depth on why he feels that strongly about the findings that the Zondo Commission and the Nugent Commission have done. And yet Sasol, who are the kind of company that facilitates the existence and indeed expansion of Bain in South Africa, think differently. They think that Bain have what did he say? I can't remember the exact description, but that they've done good, they've done right.
Well, Alec, I can just tell you, I've been monitoring Appel Williams' tweets over the last few days. There's been a real public relations campaign launched by Bain Company in South Africa. Stephen York, their partner here, writing this open letter to South Africa saying they want to be a force for good in South Africa, and they apologize. Mr. Williams says, you apologize for what exactly? You need to tell us what you apologize for, and that requires honesty, openness, and transparency. You need to tell us what you did at SARS. You need to tell us what your former partner, Mr. Mazone, what he was doing at private meetings with Jacob Zuma and who was at those meetings. You need to come clean on that, or your apology means nothing.
Michael Appel and Lucy Ferreira are colleagues of mine at Biznews, and this has been our episode 41, as Lucy told us earlier, of the Biznews Business Briefing. Lucy, what are we looking forward to tomorrow?
So we've got Lisa Raleigh in studio with us tomorrow, Alec, ahead of the Biznews conference, when her and Stafford will be joining us, and they'll be speakers at the conference next week. So I think that's going to be quite a lot of fun. A slight departure from our more serious business and politics focus. And then later on in the week, we've got a really interesting interview coming up on the PBMR discussion. With some thought leaders on that. And at the end of the week, we'll be chatting to Grindrod's CEO on their results.
So lots to look forward to. I'm Alec Hogg at biznews.com.
I'm Michael Appel for biznews.com. Thanks for listening.
And I'm Lucy Ferreira for biznews.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please follow Biznews Radio now on your podcast platform to make sure that you don't miss tomorrow's show. Bye for now.